Good evening. Appreciate everyone being here. Thank you for joining us at a busy time of year. This event brings together a couple of themes that we've been talking about in depth and consistently for some time. One theme is the importance of this university to the state of North Carolina. So many of you know that it's our 232nd academic year. The General Assembly of North Carolina ratified the U.S. Constitution and then founded this university. And I'm pretty sure that for every one of those 232 years, this institution, our university, has been the most important pillar on which we build a better future for the people of North Carolina. And associated with that is the growing importance of North Carolina to the country as a whole. 100 years ago, North Carolina wasn't nearly as important to the national conversation as it is now, but we will be the 7th largest state by 2030. The students who we are admitting for the class that will start this fall are the class of 2030. So it's not very far away. And North Carolina's importance economically in terms of population growth and certainly politically just continues to increase. The second theme that we've been discussing quite a bit is the importance here at Carolina of educating not just scholars, but citizens. And particularly in an era in which most of the world's knowledge is available to everyone instantly for free. What we're doing here that is most valuable is not primarily the transfer of information. It's the training of citizens in the sense of how to think, how to reason critically, and crucially, how to have constructive, respectful dialogue with each other across differences of belief, ideology, and politics. And so this panel is an excellent example of both of those themes. We're delighted that the School of Civic Life and Leadership is sponsoring it. This has been a focus for the school since inception. And I think Dean Atkins is going to introduce the panelists, but I'll just say from my own perspective, you couldn't ask for 3 better people for this conversation than the ones that we have. So David Crabtree, who is now head of PBS-NC, had a long and storied career as the most prominent news anchor here in the state, covered countless campaigns across the state, and has built a national reputation for his fairness and intellect and insight. And then the 2 campaign strategists we have here, similarly, Morgan Jackson for the Cooper campaign and Jonathan Felts for the Whatley campaign, are not only, I think, the 2 most experienced political strategists in the state, but among the most high-profile, respected, and best-known political strategists in the country. There's a reason why they're the lead strategists for each of their respective campaigns in what's going to be one of the most high-profile races in the country this year and possibly the most expensive Senate race of all time. So we're extremely fortunate to have them here on campus. Thank you all again for being here, and I'll turn it over to Dean Atkins. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chancellor Roberts, for that introduction. And you know, I have the opportunity to further introduce our panel, but before I do that, I just really want to thank the people that have made the Abbey Speaker Series so successful throughout the year. The Abbey Series is a signature series in our program for public discourse that's sponsored by a generous gift of the Abbey family, and it's about, you know, its goal is to provide important conversations to the public across difference. There's a lot of planning that goes into pulling these off. There's 4 of them that take place every year. They're often planned, 8 months to a year in advance. And so let me just call out a couple of names that have just been so important for planning. Dub Acat, Nora Hannigan, Kevin Marinelli, John Rose, Sarah Trull, did a lot of the planning for selecting the speakers. And we have a great staff team as well who work throughout the year to bring this programming and these events to you. Tanisha Mayo, Derek Neverowski, and Kiani Walters help with the logistics. And finally, we have some great student workers, student assistants, Sadie Makem and Sarah Reyes as well. Well, I was listening to the Chancellor's introduction as he talked about the quality and caliber of speakers that we have on the stage. And I was thinking, this is pretty cool. A public university is a place that at its best can offer serious, engaged, informed conversations to our public about really important topics that matter. And we can bring these types of conversations to you that might not happen in other places or might be very, very rare. And it's pretty neat to be able to have the panel before you. And I think tonight is just one way that Skills Program for Public Discourse helps the public university, the first public university that is North Carolina, fulfill its promise. And so this evening we'll preview the upcoming Senate race. And, as Chancellor Roberts says, we have a panel with decades of experience in North Carolina politics. So I'll run down quickly the names again. I'll say another word, and then I'll get us off with the conversation. So Jonathan Phelps is a communication consultant and a political strategist. After leading President George W. Bush's reelection effort in North Carolina, he joined the White House's staff in the Office of Political Affairs, and he was eventually named the White House Political Director. He is currently senior advisor to Republican Michael Whatley's campaign. Morgan Jackson has overseen high-profile campaigns in North Carolina for almost 3 decades, serving in senior roles with presidential, gubernatorial, and congressional candidates. He continues to serve as a senior advisor to Roy Cooper, Governor Josh Stein, and Attorney General Jeff Jackson. We also have, as Chancellor Roberts indicated, a really distinguished moderator, David Crabtree, CEO and General Manager of PBS North Carolina, with decades of award-winning broadcast journalism experience from his tenure at WRAL. Now, I mentioned before, one of the things that a public university does, and one of the things that the Program for Public Discourse does especially well, is we aim to serve the public. And to do that, we will be recording tonight's conversation to make it accessible to as many people across North Carolina that want to watch it. Before we begin, I will remind you that North Carolina law and university policy protects the rights to free speech and free expression, including the rights of tonight's speakers to speak and the rights of the audience to listen and to engage without substantial disruption. Campus policies provide for disciplinary action against any student or employee who substantially disrupts tonight's scheduled events. Any person who disrupts this evening's event or interferes with the rights of those in attendance to hear or see the speakers will be asked to leave. Anyone who does not leave when asked or does not put down signs, which I don't see any, which obstruct the audience's view will be removed and will be subject to appropriate disciplinary action. I also want to remind the audience that the views expressed by panelists do not necessarily reflect those of the university or sponsoring programs. So panelists, please speak freely and fulsomely. And now I'm really pleased to turn the conversation over to David.
Thank you, Dean. Dean, thank you, and our thanks to Chancellor Roberts as well. Thank you for being here tonight. As the Chancellor and the Dean said, what a great example of free expression, civil discourse, and being a part of the fabric of the community and all things political. I've got a few questions I'm going to ask, and I hope they will speak freely and openly. And then I hope you will think about questions you would like to ask. We'll spend some time. I'll come out to the audience and you can ask questions as well. I want you to know that yesterday we had a pre-seminar Zoom call. And if you could imagine the screen with the professor leading the way, then me, then Jonathan, and then Morgan. Morgan's at the far left of the screen. Over his shoulder is a panel that says, "Thank you, Roy." And over the right shoulder of Mr. Phelps was Captain America. Let that sink in for a moment. I thought it was pretty cool to see that. So here we go into what's going to be watched across the country very closely for the Senate race this year. For the past 20 years, no Republican has lost a U.S. Senate race in North Carolina. Roy Cooper has never lost an election. That history, one way or the other, is going to change this fall. I know what your predictions are going to be, but talk to us first about why this election and this path to this election is so important. We'll start with you, Jonathan.
So why this election is so important?
This one in particular.
Oh, sure. So, the road to the majority in the Senate, the road to the White House, and arguably the road to the majority in the House goes through North Carolina. Morgan speak to this too, but it's not always been that way. Growing up in North Carolina, I grew up in Davie County outside of Winston-Salem for years and years and years. I think 76 was the last time they had voted for a Democrat with Jimmy Carter for president. So the presidential years were taken for granted in North Carolina from a Republican perspective. I mean, it was not a battleground state. And just seeing how much that has changed. In '92, I was in college at NC State. You can't protest that, don't forget. I was at school at NC State, and I remember when George H.W. Bush did a whistle-stop tour through North Carolina. I had no idea that was such bad news for my candidate. If Bush was campaigning in North Carolina, that was a bad scene. Then in 2008 or 2004, as I said, I worked for the Bush campaign for 43. And we were a battleground state throughout the election once John Edwards was put on the ticket. But I think we'd closed within 3 points, that weekend that Edwards was put on the ticket. We wound up winning by 13 points. So I'd argue it really wasn't a battleground state that year. And I don't mean that in a snarky way. I just mean it was still a Republican state. But now it's not the case. I mean, you look at Barack Obama, the campaign he ran. I mean, $1 billion campaign. I forget how many field offices he had, but just the voter turnout and everything in 2008. Was incredible, and ever since then we've been this key battleground state. And so now with the Senate races, Kay Hagan won in 2008. Some would argue with the coattails of Barack Obama. Some would say with the anchor that George W. was, my old boss, that year in the election cycle for Elizabeth Dole. But ever since then it's just been this incredible. You don't have to go to Iowa or New Hampshire. Back when we were growing up, if you wanted to work on a presidential campaign, you had to get in your car and go volunteer in Iowa or New Hampshire. Now, right here in North Carolina, we are a Tier 1 battleground state, and so with the Senate race, that's why this is so important this year, and why we are doing what we're doing with so much money coming through both campaigns.
No, Jonathan's exactly. Am I on there? It'd be better if I'd cut the microphone on, guys. So first of all, it's great to be with you all. It's always good to be on campus. It's great to be with David, with Jonathan, both. I'll tell you, the thing about it, and Jonathan's exactly right about, as you look at the trajectory of North Carolina, listen, it's a great thing that if you like politics, to live in North Carolina these days. It might have been a little different 10 or 20 years ago. The reality to it is, right now, North Carolina is the purplest state in the nation, the swingiest of the swing, whatever you want to call it, the state that's most up for grabs. And we laugh about in sort of our business that a blowout in North Carolina is 3 points. That's actually a blowout election, a landslide election, because so many elections, and if you think about it, if you've paid attention or if you're a political science student, you've done some research, the last 4 cycles, we've had a ton of races, statewide races that where 5 million or 5.5 million votes are cast across the state, and somebody wins by 200 votes or 300 votes. You know, when Cooper was first elected governor in 2016, we won by 10,000 votes out of over 5 million cast. These races are incredibly close. And let me tell you a little bit about why that is. And David, I won't belabor the answer here, but I think for you to understand why we are so swinging, I think this is critical, is North Carolina is essentially 2 separate and distinct states rolled into the same border. Now, what I mean by that is the way we vote electorally and the demographics that go along with that, we are one part Northern Virginia and one part rural Alabama. And both of those states exist within our border. And what we have seen the last several cycles, and that's true this year, and it's why North Carolina will likely be the most competitive, the most expensive U.S. Senate state this cycle in the country, is those 2 states, the Northern Virginia and the rural Alabama, are basically the same electoral strength right now, the same size and the voting power. Look at the 2024 election, the election we just had. Look at the Supreme Court race with Justice Allison Riggs, who prevailed, versus Appeals Court Judge Jefferson Griffin. I will tell you that for those of you who have had 4th grade history in North Carolina, you know there are 100 counties. That's great. It's even. It's a good number. Folks like David and Jonathan and I can do that math in our heads. Don't give us 73 counties. It gets confusing. But 100 counties, okay? Allison Riggs won 24 of 100 counties, only 24. And she won those 24 counties by basically 740,000 vote margin. Now think about that. Just in those 24 counties, she rolled up a margin of 740,000. She lost 76 counties out of 100 by 739,600 and some odd votes. And so when you think about it, North Carolina is the purplest state of the nation, but very few places in North Carolina are purple. They're either deep blue or they're deep red. And people would tell you that it's a rural versus urban. And I would tell you that that's a bit of a myth, and that's an antiquated view. It is actually college educated versus non-college educated. In the 2 areas I'm talking about, if you have a higher propensity of college educated voters, you're more likely to be Democrat. If you have a higher propensity of non-college educated voters, you're more likely to be Republican. And North Carolina is split, again, not evenly as far as counties, but almost evenly as in population. And that's really what we see and why North Carolina is such a swing state right now.
You talk about it being more than likely the most expensive Senate race in history, definitely for this year. What are the latest estimates that are going to be spent in this race total?
I'll start, and I'll try to be quick. I think a lot of it depends on Texas. And what I'll mean by that is I think the early estimates of this race is people would tell you last year would probably be a $800 million or billion-dollar race, which let's be honest, it's sort of insane to think about that. Even, you know, Jonathan and I will buy lunch. We'll tell you that if it goes that much. But I think one of the interesting dynamics is and I know we're going to talk more about the environment, with the environment the way it is in this country right now, especially around the economy and inflation, I think the board is getting bigger. The map is getting bigger, and more states are coming into play, which may mean this may not be as expensive as an $800 million or $1 billion race. And I think the potential of adding Texas to the equation, as expensive and large as Texas is, the more money that's spent in places like Texas or Ohio is just not going to be spent here. And or they can't spend it all in the same, can't spend it twice. And so I do think the map is getting larger. When we started this cycle, there were really about 3 or 4 seats that were seriously going to be in play, and now there's like 6 to 7. Maybe we'll see what they come, but so I think that could reduce us a little bit. I still think we're going to be $500 million, somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 million, and what that means is not just the individual campaigns, but all the independent expenditure money on each side that's spent.
You agree with that figure?
Yeah, I agree with the figures.
It is insane.
Oh, it is insane. It is insane. I mean, the best job every other year in North Carolina is to be the ad sales rep, political ad sales rep for WRAL or take your pick of TV stations, because they make a lot more money these years than they did 20 years ago on the political ads, and you guys get to benefit from that unless you're doing DVR or something like that, because you see nothing but political ads during the election cycle. But it'll be a lot of money.
Will the main driver in this race be the economy? Will it be the war? Will it be strictly red versus blue?
I think all of the above. I think one thing I'll say just before I get directly to that is what's really interesting now is how politics have changed. And, when you work in the White House, it's always been this way where each administration really, I mean, it's only 4 years, but it's just a completely different era when you get to the next administration. It's not a function that Barack Obama massively changed for the sake of change when he came in after Bush. It was a function that he had a lot more access to a lot more ways to communicate with the American people than what Bush did, and Bush had more than what Clinton did, and go through the ages like that. But back in the day, you would have a message of the week that would feed into the message of the month, that would feed into an overall narrative for like a 3-month arc. I mean, during the White House days, we would have planning meetings for a 3-month arc, a 6-month arc, things like that, and that's not the case now. Nowadays things change on a dime. Things change a lot faster, and so that's all to say. So yes, do I think the economy and affordability is going to be a big issue? Absolutely. Do I think America's role in the world, if we are projecting strength or not projecting strength, will that be an issue? Yes. I also think the immigration issue is going to be playing a role, whether it be ICE from one perspective or border security from another perspective. I think those will be the big things. But I also think that something could happen tomorrow that completely changes things. And I don't mean back in of course 2001, horrible day, 9/11. That completely changed the trajectory of everything from the Bush administration to the election cycle that year, or that cycle. But just the way the news works these days, the way that so many different groups have a large megaphone that can make themselves heard, just things change much more rapidly. Right now, if the election were today, I would have some concerns. But the election's not today. I think it's going to be a much different situation 6 months from now, 7 months from now when the election hits. And that's one of the things that, if we spend $500 million or if we spend $1 billion, Morgan and I might make a little more than what we should make. But that's also why we get paid, though, is because we got to stay on top of all this stuff, and it's changing so much more now than what it used to, in my opinion.
It's going to be interesting. I think, and Jonathan's right. Right now, it is the economy. In every poll you see, every demographic, it doesn't matter if you're a red voter or you're a blue voter, you're completely undecided, or a swing voter. It doesn't matter if you're 20 years old or you're 85 years old, or you're male or female, you live in an urban area or a rural area. The actual cost of things is families, real people are in crisis. I mean, that's the reality of where we are today. And whether it is your grocery bill, whether it is whether it's your health care, whether your gas bill, obviously now that we're in a war with Iran, has gone up, whether it is childcare, whether it is your mortgage, whether it is your rent, everything is more expensive. And I think one of the things that we're seeing from people is, in any poll that we do now, we always ask, let me back up for a second. We always ask open-ended questions. We ask questions that we give you choices as voters to get a better idea on the research that we do to where you are. But we always start with open-ended questions. And one of those questions is, what is the biggest concern for you and your family right now? And many times over many years, it's been a number of things. It's been education, it's been the economy, it's been unemployment, it's been immigration or crime, or, as I said, education, your school system, or different things. What we see right now is about 65% of voters will tell you the first thing they say that's the most concern to them and their families, the price of groceries. The second thing they say is the price of your utility bill. The third thing they say is the cost of health care. And then it's affordable housing, whether it's rent or your mortgage. And then it is childcare. And so the top 5 issues people are talking about, notice what I didn't say. I didn't say crime or immigration. I didn't say education. These are serious issues that people are concerned about. But on the level of their concern, right now it's all about the economy. And Jonathan's right. That does benefit Democrats, and it benefits Democrats, and it hurts Republicans for one major reason, is that Republicans are in charge in the White House, in the House, in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. And I tell people all the time that you have to understand the way that voters think. Donald Trump was successful in 2024 and got back into the White House because he was the candidate of change. And it's important to understand how much a motivation that change is to people in America right now. And we've been living, Jonathan will tell you, we've been living in change elections for 20 years now. Every 2 or 4 years, the bums that get thrown out were the bums that you were glad to elect the last time. But the difference is people are so unsettled and concerned with their daily ability to afford things that they desperately want change. And it's the same reason that all 7 battleground states voted for Donald Trump in 2024, because they believed under the Biden and Harris administration, they felt crippled by inflation, and they felt like they couldn't afford things, and they felt like Biden and Harris didn't do a good job of addressing it. Jonathan and I both will tell you, if you want to win elections, sometimes it's not always chess. Sometimes it's just checkers. Talk to voters about the issues that concern them and tell them what you want to do about it. And that's a real thing. And so right now, it's about the economy. And the last thing I'll say, Jonathan's right. We are 7 months away from an election. We would tell you that's a light year or light years away. The world can change many, many times. But I certainly like our position as far as Democrats today, here in April, a lot better than I like a Republican position. Sorry, Jonathan.
No, it's. I was going to agree with what he was saying there. It's always easier to run against something than it is to run when you're defending something. So we had roles reversed in 22, where I was with Ted Budd. We were running against the president in power, and it's for many, many years it was always a guaranteed thing that the president's party in power would lose seats. That's changed a little bit in recent times, and part of that goes back to what Morgan was talking about. If you think, if you're a student of political history, these change elections, which many of you in this room consider to be a normal course of events. But if you go back and look at the late 20th century, you had, 74 was a big change election for obvious reasons. Richard Nixon, the Watergate scandal, big scandal for Republicans. You didn't have another change election then until, really, I would argue, 1994, when Republicans took back took the House for the first time in multiple generations, and then no real change election until 2006. When Republicans lost the House in spectacular fashion, while I was sitting at the White House. That was a fun election night. But then that was what, 20 years, 12 years, 94 to 2000. So whatever the math is there, I was an English major. But then guess what happened in 2008? Another massive change election. Now, some would argue, well, it wasn't a change because the Democrats held the House and things like that. But I would argue 2008 was a big change election. And then what happened in 2010? Another change election with Obamacare really was an organic grassroots thing for Republicans, a big motivator for them to go out and vote. And so right there in 3 cycles, 3 change elections, it was a lot of whiplash, a lot of growing pains for the political consultant class as well.
Well, and I think, Jonathan, I'll tell you that there is a bit of a misnomer out there about how voters vote. And there's a lot of tribalism. There's way more tribalism today than there was even 2 years ago, where people are more hardened in their beliefs. And some of that's because of the algorithms on your social media channels. Some of that is because of your self-selecting, and that's a natural thing. And where we want to hang out with people who think like we do. We want to live in communities that people think like we do, and you want to watch the news with people that agree with you or giving you those kind of things. but also the algorithms are pushing you towards outrage because that makes more money. And so to have you angry, whether you're progressive or conservative, doesn't matter. It's driving you to more engagement. And what I would tell you is the reality to it in an election, a midterm election like this, is anger is what motivates voters in a midterm. It's all about turnout in a midterm. In a presidential election, and Jonathan will tell you, we don't have to worry about turning out voters. We have to worry about a lot of voters who are turning out that are not really cued into the system, and we have to persuade them. In a midterm, it's about turning out your base as well as trying to communicate with that small sliver of swing voters that actually are truly up for grabs. And I'm not talking about if you're an unaffiliated voter. The reality is, we would tell you, if you're an unaffiliated voter and you live in Orange County and you're college educated, I know how you're going to vote. If you're an unaffiliated voter and you're non-college educated, you live in Randolph County, you voting for Jonathan's guy. I can tell you that. That's nuts, regardless. But it's about that swing set of voters that truly is undecided, starts out about 12%, and through the cycle, especially as you get to the fall, works its way down to like 2%. And but again, now think about it. You think, well, that's not a lot of voters, but when you can win a statewide race by 200 votes out of 500 million, it matters. 5.5 million. And the last thing I'll say is part of the reason that campaigns are so expensive is because we have to spend so much money trying to communicate with people that don't want to hear from us. That's the swing voters I'm talking about. The people that often make the final decision and push the election one way or the other are folks who keep their head down and don't watch the news and don't want to be in politics, but they are going to vote because they're good citizens, but they are too busy. They don't live and breathe what Trump said today or didn't
Right.
say.
No, that's a great point. It's like the first thing when you find these swing voters, and you got to spend a lot of time and a lot of money finding these genuinely undecided voters. The first thing you got to spend a lot of time and effort on is, will you go vote? Because a lot of them, they're not planning on voting. I mean, if it's right there in front of them, they might go vote, but they're not really making a plan to go vote. It's not something we're making as a priority. And so you're spending a lot of time and effort just getting them to the point of saying, yes, I'll go vote. And then you start hitting them with, well, what issues do you care about? And, trying to shape the narrative that way. But then just put a point on it too, in terms of how much money we spend. And this dating myself here, but, in the Bush administration, we had a basic rule, and that is you did not get a political appointment job if you hadn't voted. Not in the system. If you're not going to play in the system, you don't get to benefit from it, if you will. And so I had a friend of mine call me one time. She's like, "Oh, I've got this great guy. He's really been great. We should really plug him in there." And I said, "Well, what's the problem?" "Well, he didn't vote." And I said, "Well, okay, let me see if I can help you." So I went through a series of questions. The excuse was he played football at an Ivy League, so he'd left his home early and just forgot to do his absentee ballot. And so I should have asked this question on the front end, but I finally said, "Well, where's he from?" She said, "Ohio." For those of you who remember or have studied your history books, Ohio was like the big battleground state that year for, it came down to overnight. Bush never got to celebrate a victory on election night. So it was the next day as they settled everything out in Ohio. And I said, well, I won't mention her name, but I said, so-and-so, we spent this much money getting him to go vote. I'm sorry, I can't help you. Because, Rove knew the number, the president knew the number, I knew the number. We knew exactly how much money we'd been spending, and we'd spent several $1,000s just to get that one person to vote, because we were touching everyone like that who was a likely Republican voter who we suspected might not be planning to go vote.
When you talk about undecided voters, let's first go back to the last 2 or 3 presidential races. I found it odd when pollsters would talk about undecided voters, because for the life of me, I couldn't believe anyone was undecided in that presidential race. So are you talking more about getting voters out that just might stay home, but they have an opinion? They're human beings. They're not, I just can't see people waffling back and forth between the choices we've had in the past 3 presidential races. So first part of the question is, are we really talking about getting out the vote more than an undecided voter? Maybe they're undecided whether or not they're going to vote. And what will you do to really push to get people out to vote in this Senate race that might not have the spark that other states are going to have?
So the first thing I'll say is, if you think about the last three presidential elections, and it's a very good question, David. The reality is the large majority of undecided voters in the last three elections didn't like their choices, period. Either side. Whether it was Trump and Clinton, whether it was Biden and Trump, whether it was Biden and Trump again, they didn't like their choices, especially, by the way, if you're 18 to 24 years old. What do you have in common with a couple of octogenarians? I mean, that's the reality. We saw that especially with young voters who are like, these guys don't get me. They have no understanding of my life. And so there are certainly some people that are very undecided about whether they're going to vote, but a lot of it is about your choices and candidates. In the last three elections, the nominees for each of our parties, and now Trump has been the nominee all three times, have been some of the most unpopular with the highest unfavorable ratings in modern history. I mean, that's just a fact. Hillary Clinton was that way in 2016. Biden was that way in 20, and was in bad shape in 24. And Harris was not much better. Trump's numbers have been bad the entire time. They've been consistently bad. But people didn't like their choices at the end of the day. And I think the difference in this Senate race is you're not dealing with people that at least start this race with the high unfavorables that those presidential candidates had. And that's just that, it's unfortunate, but that's just a reality.
And Jonathan, your candidate is not nearly as well known today as Roy Cooper is. So you have to look at what Morgan was just talking about with an extra set of lens of how do I get my guy out there so people know beyond the fact that he's a Republican, who he is and what he stands for.
Yeah, I mean, I was on spring break with my kids last week, so fortunately my phone was not actually working other than for email and text, so it's kind of a blessing in disguise. But I would look at Twitter from time to time, but actually, you'll be proud of me. I put it down and would read a book. I read 2 books last week. It was amazing.
And probably comic books though.
No. They had words and everything, no pictures or anything like that. I do have a lot of comic books though, and I actually listen to my children some too. But there was some polls that came out last week, and I had a few text from reporters like, Jonathan, do you realize that Michael Watley is not nearly as well known as Roy Cooper? And luckily, I could not use my phone, and I didn't want to put anything in print. That's what I was thinking, because I was like, yeah, no duh. He's been in statewide office for 24 years. He's been in office for a lot longer than that. Roy Cooper is a fairly well-known individual. And so with getting the name out there, I mean, there's lots of things we'll be doing, but I mean, one of the big things obviously is the TV stuff. It's always so funny, like, and Morgan's seen this too, like, people always assume campaigns are really glamorous and just like they see in Hollywood or something like that, and that's not the case. You never really lived until the Super 8 Hotel in Waterloo, Iowa is the nicest hotel you've stayed in for several weeks on a presidential campaign, which is supposed to be all limousines and black Suburbans and things like that. But most candidates who are running statewide for the first time, no one knows who they are until usually after Labor Day, when the TV ad buys get real hot and heavy. That's when they're starting to go to the grocery store like, oh, aren't you that guy? Aren't you that woman? Aren't you running for this or that or whatnot? And it's always funny to see how that process works out. But in terms of one of the big challenges we face on the Republican side is that Trump, one of his keys to success is that he turns out voters who haven't voted in their entire lives or hadn't voted in a generation. And that was a big part of his key to success in 2016 was he talked about the forgotten people. That wasn't just empty words. That wasn't just something somebody had poll tested. That was people who genuinely felt like no one cared about them on either party. And with a lot of them, and again, this goes back to the challenge, is that with a lot of them, it wasn't that they necessarily loved Trump. They just loved the idea that somebody's going to stick it to both parties. And that's what they saw in Trump. They felt like he was an authentic fighter for them. And that's hard to replicate. And there's many a losing candidate who tried to replicate that over the past 10 years. And you gotta find your own groove. And so we're going to have the appropriate messaging for Michael Watley. I mean, we had to struggle with Ted Budd with should probably be careful how I say this, but with the Budd versus Beasley race, one of the big challenges I face talking to reporters all the time, So they wanted to come in, they wanted to cover this exciting race. Well, there's not a lot of 1,000-person rallies unless you've got a presidential candidate coming to town. Most events are fairly small. I mean, 50 to 100 people, things like that. But also, too, it's like, a lot of politicians, and I would say Beasley and Bud were very much like this, very cautious individuals. They're not the Marjorie Taylor Greens. They're not the Donald Trump. They're not, who's our friend, Madison Cawthorn, the flamboyant, shall we say. And so it's, it takes a while to build up that name idea and those that interest.
Here we are with the speaker series. We're talking about civil discourse. This university wants to be a leader in that conversation around the country. We have seen incredible division, particularly in the past couple of years. And then it seems to me calmed a bit, or have we just become numb to the outrage and the outrageous things that we hear on both sides? Which do you think?
Yes. No, I think to some degree, I wouldn't say we've become numb to it, but just discourse in general has changed so much. I mean, even listening to my kids talk, how they talk to each other versus how I talk to my friends when I was that age, things like that. But yeah, I think Morgan would agree with this. Like, there's such a big megaphone for the malcontents in both parties now, where to some degree you've got to tune it out because we got to make decisions based on real data and real swing voters. The malcontents. I mean, and again, this is for both parties. I mean, Michael Watley could cure cancer, and there would be somebody unhappy in the right-wing fringe of the Republican Party here in North Carolina. Roy Cooper could walk on water, and someone would complain about why is he getting his feet wet, things like that. But it's also, too, to some degree, both parties want fighters. Yeah, I think back to the profile that Kevin did on Josh Stein, which I guess was really y'all's kickoff for the governor's race. And I think I'm correct here. The lead was something to the effect of, Josh Stein wants you to know he's a fighter. He used the word fight 5 times in the first 5 minutes of our conversation, things like that. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I just mean people have come to expect conflict. I think they've come to expect the unexpected.
And listen, I think we live in I think all that's, I agree with everything Jonathan said, and I think we live in challenging times, and that's not an excuse. It is, I think a lot of the rhetoric that we see coming, out of the White House or out of the national debate, if you even want to call it a debate, the things that we're hearing are not how we used to hear leaders talk to each other or talk about each other. And you're crazy if you think that doesn't trickle down to people, because you're modeling what you see. And I think one of the biggest concerns from people is the sort of lack of decorum, the lack of leadership. There is, and Jonathan's right, there are part of people who won't change so desperately. They're glad for norms to be thrown out the window. They don't care about protecting institutions if you can't pay your light bill, it doesn't really matter if there's a democracy. And I think I say this to my Democratic friends, a lot of the questions around 2024 were about abortion rights, were about democracy. Is Trump gonna try to be a dictator and try to change the way everything works? And then he came in and people were like, how in God's name did we allow this to happen? It's like, you have to understand, being concerned about gerrymandering or democracy or even reproductive rights seems sort of trivial if you can't pay your grocery bill. And again, that's not an excuse. That's just a reality of where people are. And I think we're seeing the same thing now. But because of that, people so unhappy, they feel, we've been doing a bunch of focus groups, and Jonathan and I have actually talked about some of this offline, not sharing our secrets with each other, but doing focus groups. And if you all have never seen a focus group, you get 10 people in a room that are theoretically or screen in as an undecided voter. And one of the first things you do is just talk to them about their life. You don't talk to them about politics at the front. You talk to them about their life and saying, tell us who's at home. Do you live at home by yourself? Do you have kids? Do you have dog? Do you whatever? And they'll give you that kind of information. Are you retired, or do you work, or do you whatever? And I'm struck by the focus groups we've been doing over the last 6 months, the number of people who before they can even tell you who's at home with them, they tell you how much they're struggling financially, or they tell you that they have an adult child home with them that they are afraid are never going to get a job, and that things are not going to be better for their children than they were for them, or they have an aged parent who they've had to move in with them because they can't afford to go to a senior facility or have in-home care at their home. And y'all, that's what real people and a lot of your families, I see some of you nodding your head, are dealing with the same thing. That's just the kind of pressure that keeps you anxious, and it makes you angry when things are happening. And again, I'm not excusing the vitriol that's coming from either side. And I think Jonathan's right about the sort of malcontents on the far left and on the far right. But it creates, in turbulent times, you end up with a place where voters are willing to throw norms out the window because they're really focused on I need help today, not 6 years from now, not 10 years from now. I need to be able to afford my grocery bill. I can't worry about whether or not the New York Times is partisan or not, or whether Fox News is telling me the truth or their version of the truth. I can't afford my bills. And I think that's where voters are right now.
So Jonathan, I mean, in all fairness and with all due respect, Republicans haven't always had the best record of being, or at least demonstrating empathy and letting people know we really care about you and these issues. It's been more of a focus either on a hot button topic, or whether it's immigration or national defense, or against something versus, not to borrow Bill Clinton's line, but I feel your pain really still resonates with a lot of people. How do you combat at least that perception and make your nominee more empathic?
So I would push back on that a little bit. I think that, some candidates have some trouble showing empathy, and I was about to check my watch when you brought that up, so I know you're probably thinking about George H.W. Bush, who famously checked his watch when Bill Clinton was talking about, I think the questions about the economy, and he walks to the camera and talks about a woman he had met, and I'm sure it had been focus grouped extensively before he brought her up, but George W. looked at his watch, or George H.W. looked at his watch. But then you have W., who I think was one of the more empathetic presidents that we had, and that was actually one of the keys to winning in Ohio back in '04 was, there was an ad that one of the first independent expenditure groups put up there, and it was, Variety. It was about a little girl who lost one of her parents on 9/11, and she lived in Ohio, and it wasn't planned; it just happened organically. And I think they had contacted the campaign after the fact. But when Bush was at a parade, he, gave her. She told him the story, and he gave her a hug. And somebody captured that image, and that's how we found out about it. But that was one of the things that got cited in our focus groups was the impact of that ad. When they saw that, Bush would also, 43 that is, he would also do Gold Star meetings whenever we went places. It wasn't every single stop, but and even though I was in political affairs, we had the local contacts, so we'd be tracking down the families of people who had died, were killed in action in the global war on terror. And he was a very empathetic guy. One of the things but then you had Mitt Romney, who I would argue struggled with that quite a bit as far as the connectivity. But with our candidate, so I'm trying to think how to word this artfully here, but with Trump, he doesn't show empathy the way you and I would show empathy. I don't think that's a big topic for debate or anything like that, but a lot of these people who are angry, as Morgan says, who feel like they've been ignored, they do feel empathy with him. They feel like he's very authentic. They feel like what he says in public is what he says in private, and that's what they like about him. And so it's not empathy in a traditional sense, but I think he does deserve more credit for empathy than what we might realize, just because he's connected with people in a way that makes them think he understands their issues, understands their problems, and wants to be helpful. And again, when you're angry, even that help is just sticking at somebody else. They're not getting one over on you. That's something people respond well to. In terms of with Michael Whatley, look, Michael's a good guy. We are preparing lots of beautiful ads. We'll be all positive, Morgan, I promise you. I did like earlier when Morgan said, yeah, right now, the negatives are very low. It's like, he had that caveat of right now they are. But no, I think Michael's got a good story to tell. He's self-made man, son of an accountant, son of the town librarian up in Blowing Rock, put himself through college, been a successful guy through life, just like Governor Cooper, three adult children who still seem to actually love being around him and the wife, and so that's always a positive sign for any candidate, I think. And so we've got a good story to tell, and so we'll be telling that as we go into the fall.
Will there be sharp elbows this fall?
Uh,
I guess there always to a degree.
That's like a question is is there going to be air to breathe? Yes. Listen, I here's what I'll say about negative ads. I don't like them. Jonathan doesn't like them. You don't like them. The reason we run them is because they work. If they didn't work, all you would see is sunshine and rainbows everywhere. The reality to it is, especially in a climate where voters are so unsettled and frankly so angry at the situation, they're looking more. And when I talk about change elections, Jonathan did a great job of sort of walking through change elections. All but one of those elections that were massive change elections were about anger, getting rid of who was in power. Whether Democrat or Republican is immaterial, is voters want change, and change is driven by anger. It's not driven by hope. And that's an unfortunate political reality, but it is what it is. And so, listen, I think our campaign is going to focus on telling Roy Cooper's story, but also, more importantly, what Roy Cooper wants to do about the economy and what he wants to do to help families today. And we're also going to point out what we think about our opponent, and we'll make sure that every voter out there understands the real Michael Watley.
Is that a
See,
nice
Morgan
way
and
of
I
saying
have
you're-
the same
you'll
goal. We
stoke
both
the
want to
anger?
tell the Roy Cooper story.
Yeah, that's right. We're both going to tell the Roy Cooper story. I like our ability to tell it a little bit better.
When you talk about negative ads, though, you are really stoking anger wherever you can find it, are you not?
You are stoking anger, but you're also trying to show the contrast to voters who are trying to make a decision about who they want. And listen, as I talked about, there are a lot of voters, and some of you political science folks know about what's called closed pen voting. And the reality to it is, a lot of people make decisions based on who they don't want more than who they do want. And again, that's not ideal. I wish it was the other way around, but that's the reality of, we talk about politics a lot, and you have to understand politics is about winning, y'all. At the end of the day, it ain't about coming in second.
Yeah, there's no second place.
No,
happy
and-
second place.
And you can't change public policy, and you can't help people and drive an agenda unless you win. And so the reality is, you got to win first.
You look at this audience tonight, and I think it's fair to say the majority of the audience is a younger audience that may be looking to vote for the first time or the second time in their lives. What do you do to speak directly, to have your candidate speak directly, as you referenced earlier, of young voters in the past couple of presidential elections looking at their chances and saying, how in the world can they know what I'm feeling?
I mean, I'll give you an overly technical answer without being too technical, I guess. I mean, Morgan's much more the data guy than I am. I have a business associate I work with who's my smart guy. I'm just the pretty face. But again, North Carolina political history here. One of the biggest changes that Jesse Helms brought to the political equation was he was one of the first ones to really focus in on direct mail. For years, candidates had raised money in their home state. Jesse Helms, whether it was fighting the communists or on a pro-life thing or things like that, he was one of the first candidates to start raising money from like little old ladies in Idaho who had like $10 they wanted to send to him because they cared about that specific issue. Fast forward to 2004. I'm sure other people might try to take credit for this, and maybe someone can take credit for this. But in the Bush campaign, we tested it on the mayor's race in Canton, Ohio. So 2003, Canton, Ohio. Gosh, I'm blanking on her name right now, but the home of the NFL Hall of Fame. We started testing something called micro-targeting. And so micro-targeting, what that was instead of just taking all this political data, for years, the data that we would use for campaigns was all political data. We started indexing that with commercial data. And there's, it would terrify all of us to know how much data is out there about us. And this was, before the age of iPhones, if you will, when we were all sacrificing our privacy voluntarily. But when you move, you think, what's the first thing that finds you? It's the catalogs. When you, so it's always that they spend lots of money on the commercial side because they want to know what motivates you to buy stuff. They want to know what kind of shoes you want to buy, what kind of latte you want, what kind of car you want, things like that. So we did a test run with it in Canton because that city kind of, it best matched, the demographics best matched your traditional bellwether battleground states back in 2004. And so, what we found, and this is an overly simplified example here, but what we found was if you were unregistered to vote and you drove a Volvo and you liked a skinny latte from Starbucks, you were probably voting for John Kerry. If you drove a pickup truck and had a gun rack in the back, you're probably going to vote for George W. if we can get you registered. And then what the Obama folks did in 2008 was just took that and put it on steroids in terms of their ability to micro-target people. And so, again, not to be overly technical, but to your question though, David, I mean, we're going to run the same focus groups. We're going to run the micro-targeting. We're going to have a pretty good idea of what motivates people, and that's what we're going to contact them with.
Well, and I think that all that's true. I will say specifically for younger voters, and I say this, do a lot of talking to college campuses and different classes and things like that. And I'll tell you, the thing that you have to reconcile as a younger voter, a lot of times is you ask the question, why are candidates not talking about issues that I care about? All right, younger voters care way more about climate change. Younger voters care than non-younger voters. Then care way more about rights, LGBT rights, about reproductive rights, about a personal rights, but care more about the future. And you feel like candidates aren't talking about that. And part of the reason candidates don't talk about it is because talk about it as much is because the most reliable voters in this country and in this state still are over 55 years old. And those are the ones who are showing up every single time. And the truth is, for young voters, those issues are critically important. But you all actually have, sure, you all have more at stake in this election than people my age or Jonathan or David or your parents or your grandparents' age, because you're going to be around to deal with the consequences of the good public policy or the bad public policy that comes out of Washington or out of Raleigh. And so I think some of that is you've got to meet voters where they are, David, first of all. And I think, and Jonathan talked about micro-targeting. I think you're going to hear a lot from our campaign in particular directed to you about the issues that you care about. And the reason we're doing that and the reason they're going to do that is so that you will see what the issues, where we are on those issues, and you can make up your mind on the issue that you're most passionate about. And it's very different. Our ability to target you, follow you around on every screen that you have, from your cell phone to your laptop to your tablet if you have one, from your Instagram account to your Facebook account. And I know you only have Facebook accounts for Marketplace, that none of you communicate on Facebook. That's our generation thing. But for Instagram or TikTok or et cetera, we follow you around on those to get messages to you, individualized messages, so that you'll see where we stand on the issues that you care about, in hopes that you'll turn out and vote.
Okay.
Hi, thank you all for coming here today. I feel like a lot of this conversation has been centered around, besides discussions about the individual candidates themselves, has been centered around kind of fitting this race into the national, standards and understanding it through those contexts. And speaking at this state's flagship university, I did kind of want to turn some of the attention back onto some North Carolina specific stuff. And I wanted to ask, what are some things about running a statewide race in North Carolina that, whether historically candidates in the past have had to plan around, whether your candidates are having to look forward to, or strategists such as yourself are having to plan for, prepare for, and some things that are North Carolina specific that your candidates or candidates in the past have had to focus on when running these crucial statewide races?
So they're especially, it's a great question, especially in this environment in a midterm, okay? Again, it's a very different strategy in a presidential year. Turnout is not your problem in a presidential year. Persuasion is your bigger problem. You still have a base that you're trying to juice your base and get them to focus. But in a midterm election, these elections are won or lost based on turnout. So think about it like this. 33% of the people who voted in 2024, even in this room, are not going to vote this year. Just not going to do it. That is the way it works. There's a drop in the reason there's such a drop in midterm turnout, even though turnout has been going up in midterms, but they have in the presidential years as well, is because you have to when you have a presidential and a gubernatorial and all these elections on the ballot, people are just more aware and they're going to vote. They think it's more relevant. In a midterm, again, people have busy lives, and it's not the first thing. Jonathan and I spend all day thinking about politics. The reality is most people don't think about it at all purposely. And so turnout is your big question. And so how does that break down? I'll tell you how it breaks down for Democrats, and then I'll hand it to Jonathan to let him talk about sort of how they think about it. And this is not trade secrets. Our goal as Democrats, turnout, really juice the margins in urban areas. Okay, that means Raleigh, Charlotte, Durham, Chapel Hill, Asheville, Greenville, Wilmington, et cetera, et cetera. That's how we win elections in North Carolina. If turnout is lower in those places and doesn't hit certain marks, we can't win statewide. So we have to juice our turnout in the urban areas that are growing and growing rapidly. They're more diverse. They're more college educated. We have to fight for voters in the suburbs. And I will tell you that the suburbs are often, whether it's the soccer moms, whether it's the national security moms, whether the whatever moms, the different moniker that the media sometimes gives them every 2 or 4 years, those are ultimately the suburbs that are usually the deciders, because they do ping pong back and forth every election. And it's because they have no loyalty to either political party. And a lot of them are registered unaffiliated because they don't want to be associated with either party, but often vote based on their economic situation. And these are people that may have voted for Trump in 24 and voted for Biden in 20 because they wanted change in both of those elections. In rural North Carolina, our job in rural North Carolina is to not win rural North Carolina, because you have to be a realist, is to lose by less. And actually, I would even tell you, is to not lose by more. The reason North Carolina continues to be a 50-50 state is the rapid growth in the blue areas theoretically should turn this to a blue state. But the challenge has been, and Jonathan brought up it earlier, and it's an important point, I want to underscore it, Trump's ability to ramp up turnout in red North Carolina over the last, I guess, 12 years, what we've been working on here, has been able to keep this state even keeled in a way that both sides can win an election, or it's a very tight election, because the turnout in rural areas has actually outpaced turnout in many of the urban areas. And, you know, at some point, there begins to be a tipping point. But those are the kind of demographic things we think about of how you win an election in North Carolina. And we could talk all night about exactly how you do that. But as far as demographics, that's a big thing that we think about on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, he's correct about the urban versus rural. I mean, we obviously want to maximize our rural vote. You know, going back to, again, 2022, we were up in the war room, and so Mecklenburg and Wake County both reported right out of the gate. Like 22 was the first year where they were well, maybe the last year, I guess, actually, they were allowed to count the early votes during the day. You know, once voting started, they could count the early votes. Now they have to wait until the polls close to count the early votes. And so Meck and Wake came out, I mean, I feel like within like 10 minutes of the polls closing. And we were down, I forget what the number was, but it's basically double the number of what our data modeling indicated we could lose by on the early vote and, you know, still win the election. And so I went down, and I had a couple reporters come up to me like, Jonathan, are you okay? I mean, you guys are down this many votes. Was that what you expected? And I was like, oh yeah, exactly. I totally thought we were going to be right here. I went back upstairs. I told my guys, like, okay, I need 5 counties. Where are we going to make this up at? You know, give me something I can give to reporters. And he talked about Beaufort County, which is a good example where, you know, people like the reporting class, I feel like they really focus a lot on the suburbs of Charlotte and Raleigh. We have a lot of young out-of-state folks, college educated, like Morgan says, that's where they're moving to. But what the reporters always overlook is sometimes I call them the halfbacks. They you know, moved from the Northeast to get away from blue state policies in the bad weather. They went to Florida, and then they realized North Carolina, that's half the distance back home. and it's about a third less of them cost-wise and whatnot, so they move halfway back, get half back. But those folks, they're not looking for higher taxes. They're not looking for more regulation. They're looking to stretch that dollar as far as they can. And so, that's some of the people we have to vote to adjust for. But, trying to get to your question, though, and I don't want to be, Morgan gave a great answer, and I don't know if that was more of what you'd already been hearing. But, a good example where North Carolina is unique would be, when you're running statewide in North Carolina, all of a sudden you got to be front and center with the military. Fort Bragg is going to be the tip of the spear if there's any military action. And again, going back to my most recent Senate race with Ted Budd, he had represented an area basically like Davie County, Iredell County, like in the center of the state. No military ties. I think there's a CBOC or a outpatient clinic in Salisbury now for the VA. But he never had done anything with the military. And so once he became the nominee, I forget what military action we had in 2022, but something was going on. Fort Bragg was mobilizing, and I had to call the official office and say, "Hey guys, where's the tweet?" They're like, "The tweet about what?" I'm like, "Fort Bragg." They're like, "Fort Bragg's not in our district." I'm like, "Guess what? It's in your state, and you gotta be focused on the military stuff." Another example that's kind of unique to North Carolina that goes back somewhat to the urban-rural divide, but free trade. And dating myself here again, back to the 2002 race with a guy named Robin Hayes. He lived in a very rural district. He represented a very rural district. A lot of the other surrounding congressional districts, they had a lot of folks who had really embraced free trade. We cannot embrace free trade, and so it's not as big of an issue as it used to be. But free trade versus fair trade, I guess that was a big thing. It used to be a big thing in North Carolina. And there's a variety of things, but that's a good one. And then of course agriculture. You gotta know your agriculture stuff. You can always tell a first-time candidate for federal office in North Carolina when their eyes light up when you bring up agriculture, and they're like, "Oh, you guys know what the most important part of national security is? Food security." And then I pull the candidate aside and say, "Hey, just so you know, farmers don't care about that, and they're not going to vote on that." But it's when they get the first ag briefing, that's what they're real focused on.
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for being here. Obviously, this is a historic race for North Carolina. Going back to micro-targeting, I mean, Whatley's down big in western North Carolina from Helene. Do you not feel as if this is a missed opportunity for the Democrats to take advantage? I mean, I know Roy Cooper has had several events in western North Carolina. And Trump's rates are obviously declining very rapidly with the war. Do you not feel like this is such a missed opportunity for Democrats to take advantage of rural North Carolina? I mean, Roy Cooper's from Nash County, so eastern North Carolina obviously has a great standing. Why not take advantage of this opportunity?
Listen, I think we are trying to take advantage of the opportunity, and I think you're exactly right. When I was talking about the sort of rural issue is when you look at the demographics of the last several cycles. The reality is I think we are in a different cycle, and we're in a different cycle than we have traditionally been in because voters won't change so desperately. And I think there are opportunities in rural North Carolina that did not exist for us 2 and 4 years ago that do exist this time. And I think Hurricane Helene is certainly part of that equation. But again, when you think about the economy and every voter in North Carolina is feeling the price of inflation, but rural voters, and especially those that are non-college educated and might be further down the economic ladder, are feeling it way harder than anybody else. And they need change more than anything. And it's not just change about prices. It's about look at what's happening with the Medicaid cuts coming out of D.C., and we expanded Medicaid in North Carolina. Governor Cooper did it a few years ago, 715,000 people. Most of them in rural North Carolina have access to health care. And when Medicaid gets cut and you lose your health insurance and you don't have employer-based insurance, or the subsidies have gone away and you can't afford health care anymore, it becomes an economic issue. And so we see all these issues as ripe for discussion and opportunity. And I think we have more opportunity in rural North Carolina this year in particular than we've seen in probably the last decade. It's a great question, and I believe you will see that play out. We will see in 7 months, but I do think we're in a different place.
Yeah, I'm not defending Morgan or certainly Roy Cooper, but I'm very confident Roy Cooper and Morgan Jackson will not be taking anything in rural North Carolina for granted with this election cycle. But I mean, and this is not a trade secret, and this is something we're obviously prepared for well before Michael Whatley ever made his announcement. But one of the strengths that Roy Cooper does bring to the table is obviously there are a lot of people in the state who voted for Donald Trump and Roy Cooper. And so, it's my job is to define Roy Cooper in a different way to some of those voters. His job is to make sure Roy Cooper keeps that same stature he's got right now. And so, it was a good question, and I appreciate the question. But like I said,
Yeah, we've got
I
a
wish-
lot. We've got a lot of questions
Okay,
to
sure.
get to if we can. So
We'll try to
yes.
be quicker in our answers.
All right, hello. Thank you both for taking the time to come out here tonight. My name is Rowan. I'm a sophomore here, and I always love this question, but I would really appreciate it if both of you could share one thing that you appreciate or like about the candidate the other person is representing.
That is a great question. I'll start. I don't think I've ever met Whatley personally, but I will tell you I appreciate his roots. I appreciate the fact he's a good family guy. He cares deeply about his family. And listen, I think he wants a better North Carolina and a better America. We might not agree on the specific policies or path, but I think he's in it for the right reasons, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, Roy Cooper, he's, I would say Lee Greenwood, the God Bless the USA, but he's an American success story, a local small town guy made good. And I alluded to this earlier, but I mean, he's got 3 adult children who seem to love and care for him very deeply, even as adults, and that's always a positive sign of someone.
Hi. Increasingly, election results have been contested, and given this trend, are you thinking at all about the possibility that if you win, the other side would litigate the results of this election? And if that's so, are you concerned that, is it like a serious concern that they might be successful in those attempts?
I mean, we can be a quick answer, I think, here, and that is ever since, certainly before then, but ever since the election in 2000, we call it election day operations. There is a legal plan in place for, I think, both sides, and lots of lawyers on retainer and on standby to deal with things like that.
I think unfortunately it's become an everyday occurrence. And Jonathan's right. We've planned for those scenarios for years. The reality to it is, instead of planning for those scenarios a month before Election Day, which was what we used to do 20 years ago, now it's a 12 months or 24 months ahead full employment status for every lawyer in the state, because we know this is going to be a close. The thing I can tell you about North Carolina, it's going to be a close election, which means when there are close elections is that the side that loses it doesn't have to contest but so many votes in order to potentially make that a flip. When you win by 10 or 15 points, there's not a vehicle to contest it. And so, because it's the nature of our small elections, and I think, listen, we've seen election denialism become a real thing, whether it is actual true or not. The reality is a lot of candidates have participated in that.
I was just curious whether or not in the focus groups that you guys are running and the kind of surveys that you're putting out, whether AI is something that you've heard from voters, or if that's kind of a non-issue in North Carolina. Maybe that's something that younger voters are more concerned with. Maybe it's more of a national issue, but I was curious if that's something that had come up at all.
So yeah, it's interesting. I think AI, I don't think we're there yet, but we're going to get there. I will tell you the issue that it really comes up with voters right now when you talk about AI is data centers. That's the thing people are most concerned about. And you see a lot of municipalities and communities starting to ban them or take tax credits and things that they had been trying to recruit them there. And now you're seeing sort of and a lot of that's AI driven, right? It's tangential to that. And so what we see come up a lot is people's opposition to data centers, the NIMBY, I don't want it here because it's going to raise my utility bills and it's going to consume X amount of water, so much water. And there's a lot of concern about that that's driving it. And I think people connect that to AI, but a little bit they love the ChatGPT because the ChatGPT can tell them how to cook any recipe they want in 30 seconds or less and can plan their whole schedule, if their trip to their vacation and everything else. And I'm amazed actually at some people that will tell you how often they use it. Not just ChatGPT, but AI in general. And it's for everyday mundane activities.
Yeah, I have seen a lot about it, and there's a lot of fear in a lot of the public polling. And to some degree, that comes back to like the college educated versus non-college educated. in some ways, it's like the free trade issue was, say, 25 years ago, where free trade, a lot of these, international deals, our GDP went up. You had a lot of folks making a lot of money, but, in Wilkes County, they're making sandwiches at Wawa versus making furniture, where they got a lot more satisfaction on making the furniture. With the AI, there's this unknown. And so my wife, she's with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. What's supposed to be telecommuting, and it's more commuting these days, but she sees it as like it's going to open up a whole new economic opportunity for so many different Americans. A lot of Americans see it as it's going to wipe out jobs, and will my kid, getting a degree in software engineering, is he going to find a job now? Or is AI going to take that out? And so there's a lot of fear of the unknown right now with AI.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for being here. This question is to Mr. Feltz in relation to Mr. Wadley's campaign. So I read that his campaign is more focused on public safety. Correct me if I'm wrong. But how do you assess the balance between public safety and economic concerns in voters' priorities in these elections?
And I apologize, I can't hear out of my right ear. Could you repeat the question again?
Again, okay. So I read that Mr. Wadley's campaign is more focused on public safety, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if that is the case, how do you assess the balance between public safety and economic concerns in the voters' priorities?
What I would say is public safety. I mean, that's one of the platforms of the Watley campaign, but it's not all the platform. But in terms of borders and things like that, I mean, you talk to any honest sheriff in North Carolina, during the Biden years when we had open borders, more or less. The crime rates had skyrocketed. There was a lot more of the opioid issues, things like that. You talk to folks about what an ounce of fentanyl would cost you during the Biden years versus what it costs now, and the prices have gone up a lot, not due to inflation, due to lack of supply or lower supply. But look, I think the public safety will be a big issue in this election, but I think it's part of a broader discussion, though.
I was just curious, we were talking about the insane amount of money that's being raised. Could you tell us what percentage of that is coming from inside versus outside of North Carolina?
So it goes a little bit each way. It is an insane amount of money. The reality is there's not $500 million inside the state to fund these exorbitant races. I think generally you see somewhere on the candidate spending, the candidate fundraising, 65 to 75% of that money generally comes in state. Sometimes 80, 85%, especially early. But on independent expenditures, usually 100% of that money comes from out of state, or 90% of it. And so generally, you do have a significant investment from North Carolinians on either side, but there's also significant, when you think about the Senate race and the balance that it can tip across the country, that's one of the reasons so many folks are interested in it, wherever you live.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with most of what he was saying there in terms of the percentages with the campaign versus the IEs. The other thing that's different now that didn't used to be the case 20 years ago or 25 years ago is you have so many joint fundraising committees, and so whether you're raising that via emails, whether you're direct mail, whether you're one senator's doing an event for you in this state or that state, things like that, and so a lot of money does come from out of state now that didn't used to be involved.
Good evening. Mr. Feltz, why are you Republican? And Mr. Jackson, why are you Democrat? And did you choose your party early and just stick to it? Or have you ever considered holding loyalty to a candidate perhaps over loyalty to a party and been tempted to switch because of one particular candidate? Thank you.
Well, I was a registered independent for my first, probably 10 years, first decade. And I think I finally registered Republican. I was in a state where it was closed primary, so I had to pick a side, if you will. But I was always Republican, though. But I was technically a registered independent. I've voted for Democrats in the past. I'm sure there's some Democrat I'll vote for in the future at some point. But I'm a Republican. I mean, it's same stuff you'll hear from any generic talking points. But smaller government. I think it's better for the economy and national security, things like that. But yeah, that's why I'm a Republican. My parents, my mom was a Democrat for a long time. My dad, I'm not sure what his exact party affiliation was, but by the time I was coming of age, they were voting Republican typically. But it wasn't like, I put critical thought into it at some point. But yeah, that's why I'm Republican.
Well, we're going to give you a chance to vote for another Democrat this year. You're more than welcome to do that. So, I grew up a little bit different. I grew up in a house where my father worked for an elected official. I grew up in a family of politics. So it was, if your dad ran the hardware store, you know how to put all the nuts and bolts together, and you know where all the tools go. And so I've always been a Democrat, and I have always believed passionately in it. And it's been driven by opportunity. I believe Democrats, largely based on the focus on education and creating opportunity for as many people as possible. The policies about expanding access to health care, things of that nature, the personal rights, whether it's your voting rights or your rights to control your own body, are very, very important. And I think Democrats have always represented my views better on that. But listen, there are parts of everybody that nobody's 100% one thing or the other, and there are certain policies that I agree with that Republicans have come up with at different times that I thought have made sense, and I think that's the art of politics, is that ultimately compromise is the best way to move forward. And I think, as we were talked earlier about, winning is the ultimate goal, because you can't change lives, you can't improve public policy without winning. I think the same thing's true about governing. If you can't pass a budget, if you can't pass a bill, if you can't do something because of gridlock, partisan gridlock either way, is not helpful. The reality is people should compromise and find what's in the best interest, disagree on policy, but figure out a way to address the bigger goal that helps people. And so in that vein, I've absolutely supported some things Republicans have done in the past.
So you guys had talked a lot about Democrats' strength in this election. So I was just curious if you all can identify Democrats' weakness.
Listen, I get in trouble with my own party for being a little too honest about what I think about some of the things. And listen, I'll be real clear. Don't confuse Republicans losing with Democrats winning. Okay? And what happened in 2024, yes, Trump won, but the reality is Democrats lost. And oftentimes an election, you can gain confidence from a winning election when really the people just didn't want your other side. I would tell you, you look at the perception of both political parties right now in America, and they both suck. They're both in the tank. I mean, that's just the reality. Candidates, maybe not, but the parties themselves do. And it's because, Jonathan mentioned this earlier, is that the caricature as a Democrat, what people think we care about versus what our party actually fights for, are very different. Because of some of the loudest voices in our party, people believe that's what Democrats are for. And in fairness, the same thing's true with Republicans. And so when I talk about weakness, I think the biggest weakness Democrats have to be careful about is losing sight of the fact that this election is about people. And it's about people who are dealing with real serious problems. And just because they are in charge and they are the bums this election, throwing them out, does not make you the winner, unless you get serious about addressing the challenges that people face. And those are the lessons that you got to learn. And we've been through several cycles where Democrats lost the election and Republicans didn't learn the lesson. We've been through cycles where Republicans lost the election and Democrats haven't learned the lesson. I think that's the big weakness for our party right now, is our brand, and the fact that we have to learn the lessons that we haven't been great about in the last couple of cycles, which is it's about getting things done for people. It's not about talk, it's about walk. And I think that's the most important thing I would say about this cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big challenge for Democrats in North Carolina, and we've talked about it some, is they still don't have a good answer, in my opinion, for rural North Carolina. And so I think that's a challenge Sherry Beasley faced immensely in 22, and she had a great life story to tell, and she had some rural roots and connections and whatnot, but just no energy whatsoever with the events there in rural North Carolina. And so I think that's a challenge they'll face. And then there's, and he alluded to this, it's like, my friend Scott Jennings, we worked together in the White House days, but he talks about the 80-20 issues. And, a lot of the loudest Democrats on the national scene, they like to grab hold of those issues that 20% of America cares about and 80% of America hates. And that's a challenge. And again, we've got some of those folks on my side of the aisle as well. But, here in North Carolina, I think that's one of the challenges. I also had to laugh a little bit when he talks about how both parties do not have a great fave, unfave, shall we say. And I killed my car back in 2018, so I went out car shopping and came home. My wife's like, "Why do you look down?" I said, "Well, the fact that used car salesmen poll consistently higher than what we do in politics kind of makes me really sad today, after the day I've had and after some of the deals I've been offered."
That's very true.
Mr. Jackson, early on in the discussion, you remarked how college-educated North Carolinians tend to be tend to vote Democrat. Does the decline in college enrollment since roughly its peak in 2010 concern the Democrats? And if so, do they have any plan on dealing with that in the future?
A little bit, but I'll be honest with you. North Carolina is an in-migration state. We are rapidly growing. People move to North Carolina, especially in the Triangle, especially in the Charlotte metro area, from other states around the country. And part of that is because of the economic opportunity that North Carolina creates and the jobs that we have and the people that are moving in. It's a great question, but the people that are moving in are college educated, are largely college educated. There's sort of two different groups of people that move to North Carolina. Those who are moving for a job or for work, and they generally end up in the Triangle or Charlotte or some of the other little bit smaller metro areas, or they're retirees, as he talked about. And if they're retirees, they're moving to Brunswick County, they're moving to Henderson County, they're moving to rural Buncombe County, not Asheville. And those are very different demographics as far as electoral demographics. But so I think as long as North Carolina continues to grow rapidly, continues to expand opportunity for people, the national college enrollment does not bother me as much. But if I lived in a smaller state, it would concern me greatly.
Got time for one more question. You'll have the last.
Thank you so much. This is for Mr. Phelps. Since the start of the war, and especially after last night, this is kind of the first time that we're seeing the GOP and right-wing commentators diverging from Trump and outspeaking against Trump. I was wondering, how does this impact your messaging strategy, particularly for a purple state?
Yeah, we were talking about this before we came out here, but yeah, I mean, war of any sort is always a destabilizing thing for the party in power, because I mean, people don't like war. Bruce Springsteen started his concert the other night with the old war anthem, "War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing." And that's how a lot of people feel, no matter how they feel about whether the cause is righteous or not. But right now, I would say we will be adjusting for it, but we'll give it a little bit of time to figure out exactly what's going to be happening here in the next 2 weeks or so. And so it's 7 months between now and November. And back when we started this business, that would be maybe time for one change message. Now there's probably gonna be like 21 game-changing events between now and November. And so, but yeah, it's certainly something we have to look at, but it's not something we're prepared to talk about publicly just yet or anything.
The fact that each of you are here tonight and have been here for the entirety of this speaks volumes about this upcoming election. I want to thank you. I want to thank the university for the opportunity to be here. I'm sorry about the feedback, but could we give a round of applause to the panelists tonight, Morgan Jackson and Jonathan Phelps.
Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions. They're not going anywhere quickly because there's a reception to follow, so I'm sure your questions can be answered then. Again, thank you very much.